Good morning. This is Tim Selden, president of the Montessori Foundation, and with me is my colleague,
Lorna McGrath, as always.
Yeah.
And we have a wonderful guest with us today. Her name is Anne-Marie DeSillis. She has a child here at Newgate School, and I'm going to let her say a few words about herself. So, Anne-Marie?
Perfect. Once again, my name is Anne-Marie. I have an 8-year-old daughter that is in the 2nd grade here in Montessori, and she's been attending this school for about the last 2 years. And this is a very, very special topic for me because I do have a daughter that learns quite differently. She is profoundly gifted, and with that comes a lot of fun attributes such as ADHD, anxiety, sensory issues, that type of thing. So when Lorna asked me to help out with this, like I said, it was very close and dear to my heart.
Sure. So Anne-Marie and I have put together a little PowerPoint presentation for all of you. There's also a handout that you can download and print out if you would like to, which will give you the slides so you can have those for your reference. So let's go to the first slide, Tim. The name of our discussion today is Montessori and Children with Learning Differences. All right, let's go to the next. Anne-Marie, let's talk about what's on today's agenda. Next one. Here we go.
Anne-Marie is working on another laptop that has the slides.
We got it.
We got it.
We're on the same page now.
Okay.
So what's on the agenda, Anne-Marie?
Well, we would like to discuss how the Montessori mindset works, about self-confidence, about accommodations that the school helps out with, and experiential learning and accountability.
Absolutely. So let's go to the next slide. And so our first part of the talk, we wanted to almost kind of look at this from the teacher's perspective or the Montessori perspective. We called it the Montessori mindset. So in our first bullet, Anne-Marie, can you talk a little bit about that one?
Challenges, creativity, and intellect. This was incredibly crucial for my situation because my daughter constantly needs to be challenged. And if she is not challenged, you tend to have behavioral issues, you tend to have more anxiety. They have done a tremendous, tremendous job with the Montessori allocating and implementing their different types of tools and knowledge and that type of thing. And I noticed that a lot of the kids allow themselves to challenge themselves and to use what they are given in a way that serves a purpose for them.
Mm-hmm.
So from your point of view as a mom, tell us a little bit about your journey. When did you first realize your daughter had an exceptionality?
She was 3, and she was at a preschool, and she was always actually in the office, and she was always in the office because they would have circle time. And when circle time would arise, the teacher would come in and she would ask the students if it was sunny or cloudy outside. And my daughter would tell the teacher on a day-to-day basis, if you're that concerned, maybe you need to go to the window and look. So hence they would send her to the office. And I would sit down with my daughter and have a conversation about why this would go on day to day. And she says, Mom, it's more interesting in the office to see what they're doing. She says she's asked the teacher to explain why the clouds are forming or why it's sunny or why it's cloudy, not is it or isn't it. And that started my journey with tremendous amount of doctors and therapists to figure out exactly where she would fit. Mm-hmm. And we knew that she thought outside the box, and I knew that she was curious, and I knew that she had that thirst and the knowledge to learn. And through the grace of God, I was lucky enough to meet people that actually helped me realize that the Montessori mindset and a Montessori classroom might be the perfect environment for her, that she would be able to go at her own pace and she would be able to ask the questions that she needed to ask, and the teachers understood that, and they could even take it a step farther.
Sure. So it sounds to me like that even though in Montessori schools, especially in the elementary level, the children do have work plans many times, or some people call it a contract. It depends on the school. But within even that, the child is allowed to be creative, to be inspired intellectually. And so in a Montessori school, if a child were asking about the weather, the teacher would probably say, well, gee whiz, let's find out more about that. Let's go find a book about that, or let's go do something. Or maybe you could, do some research on that and present it to the children. So I think that that's part of why it sort of works for your daughter.
Yes.
So that's our first bullet. Our second one that we have is, as Anne Marie and I put this together, is the Montessori mindset, or the way that a teacher looks at children in a Montessori classroom, is without judgment, without comparing one child to another child and expecting every one of them to reach a certain level at a certain time or study a certain thing. And if they're not, or if they are way ahead, it's more like we can really meet a lot of people's needs, and we're not going to judge different people by, preset academic standards or grades or things like that. Tim?
Well, one of the things that always is worth talking about is in the real world, people tell us that grades and expectations and benchmarks are incredibly important. Every parent's afraid that their child won't be on grade level.
That's right.
So here you are, you're talking about no judgments, anything goes, sort of Montessori is hippy dippy. We're not really
I'm not quite sure that was what I said, but okay.
No, I'm not saying you were saying. It's more, haven't we all heard parents suggest that?
Yes.
The other thing is, here you are, you're talking about a child, whoever the child is, with exceptionalities. And we know the trade-off typically is that the family is going to a small Montessori school compared to the much larger 850,000 child public school with all the resources of the public school system: psychologists, speech therapists, language therapists, occupational therapists, you name it. And what do we got? Some non-traditional approach. None of our teachers have any background in special ed, and I think it's safe to say we're not a school for children with exceptionalities, because it's not what our certification is.
No, it certainly isn't. On the other hand, Montessori first worked with children with exceptionality, children and adults with exceptionalities. And so much of what we do is very therapeutic, not because we're trained in special education, but because of the way that the materials are designed, the way that the teachers are actually trained to observe children and see what they're capable of, what their needs are, and work with the materials in a way that makes the most sense for the child.
There's really something in that, and I want Anne Marie in a minute to look at it from a parent's perspective, but Maria Montessori never considered herself an expert in children with exceptionality.
No.
She was just a doctor. And she didn't deliberately go out and say, I want to create a school for children with exceptionalities. She just, that's what she got. And then her great interest was to get a hold of normal kids. I remember when I was in college finding a Montessori curriculum lab at the special education department at George Washington University. And the curator saying to me, Montessori belongs in every special education center because it is really the mother and father of all special education. And special education is what every child deserves, not only children with exceptionalities, because it's designed to fit the child as an individual. That's kind of what you two were talking about.
That is what we're talking about. Anne Marie, do you have any thoughts about that?
No, I actually think that every child would benefit from being in a Montessori type environment. And it's funny because even though my daughter, yes, might look different on paper, you would never ever know it when she's around all of her typical, as I call it, yes, her peers. And I realize now that every child has special, unique needs, and sometimes I think they get overlooked. And if the child was able to have the ability to allow that freedom and to let that blossom, that they would flourish even farther. And I think that the kids that end up in a Montessori type environment are the ones that are truly blessed, because the teachers, even though they aren't specially teaching for children that do have special requirements, they actually are some of the most gifted professionals that I've ever seen. And they might not realize they have those abilities, but in fact, they really do. So it's like an all-encompassing type environment where they understand the child's needs. If a child comes to them and says, I'm nervous about this, which is actually quite typical for a lot of kids, they know how to deal with it. And they deal with it the way that child might need it taken care of at that time.
Jenny has asked a question. She says, Anne-Marie, did your daughter accelerate grade level when she came here?
We talked about that, and I had long conversations with Lorna. And the one issue that we always had with my daughter was that her mental ability was so much higher than her maturity. So she has that asynchronous type development. And for me, the most important things was to try and get her balanced as far as the social peers and the social environment. The funny thing is, I haven't felt the need to actually accelerate her, because she is doing work that I can't possibly believe that she is doing. So she'll come home and she'll tell me that she had been studying the Mesahippius and was doing research on that because that's what she had chosen to do her research on. I don't even know what a Mesahippius is. I do now, actually. But she was able, with the teacher's help, to be able to push it beyond what she needed it to be. So she can still be with her peers, but she can actually take her learning to the level that she needs it at that time.
Right. So there's a flexibility
Yes.
in terms of intellectual development and stimulation, and go to where you can go that way, and yet can be with children who are
Yes.
at a level of social emotional development that she is as well.
Exactly.
So we didn't accelerate her.
No, we didn't find the need to.
No.
But we did have the conversation that if that need presents itself, that they're completely open to that, and that's something that we would look into.
Sure.
So one of the things that we often talk about is the gift of the fourth year, the child who needs more time. Instead of having them repeat the third grade or think of it as a failure, we simply keep working wherever they are and give them the gift of another year at the social level where they're comfortable. And the converse of that is you'll periodically get a child who is so far beyond the nature of the group that she's really emotionally ready to move on. And it may or may not have anything to do with academics. It may be more social and emotional maturity. And so we have the ability to be flexible. It's one of the things you point out. So what I really appreciate about your slide here is the idea that Montessori, from your experience, Anne-Marie, you as a mom felt that you found a school that was really challenging kids intellectually and yet encouraging them to be creative and to pursue their interests. The second thing was you saw a group of people who looked at kids and just saw them instead of forming judgments and putting them in boxes. And I think all educators really want to do that, but in most schools it's very difficult because the system really needs to put a label on a kid because it has to do with funding and services and class placement. The next was the idea that there's no limitations or preconceived notions that because this kid has a disability or an exceptionality or whatever it is, that somehow or another she should be treated differently or that she wasn't capable. Or the converse of the conversation is one that I have sometimes with people who believe that children who are gifted should be isolated and put in programs with only gifted children.
Wow.
And that would terrify me.
A lot of people
That would
believe
terrify
that.
me because they're not then learning the reality. And even though they're gifted, and that is something that they have either been, some parents feel blessed with or some parents feel cursed with, to be quite honest with you, they have to see their peers and they have to learn how to interact with their peers and they have to learn to interact with teachers, and if they're isolated, they're not getting that benefit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the other thing that we've got in one of our bullets there is that the teachers in a Montessori classroom don't compare children to other children. They encourage each child to do their personal best. So they're always sort of working as if they're in time trials for a cycling race. They're competing, if they are competing, if we want to use that word, against themselves. They're
exactly.
looking at what can I do now and can I do that better? What could I add to that? How can I make that more rich? And so that's an important one, I think, too. Do we have some more questions, Tim?
You know, it's like we're having a conversation with Jenny Rowling.
It is. Hi, Jenny.
Jenny, I've asked you if you want us to open up your mic because you're just rolling out the questions, no pun intended. The next thing that she asks here, because she hasn't said, yes, let's open up the mic.
Yeah.
She may have a babe at the hip. How do your children's teachers and how do Montessori teachers develop learning goals at the right rate?
Wow.
Yeah, I never figured out why people worry about the right rate. What is that all about?
Yeah.
Other than some government committee that said, this is what kids are going to learn this year. And,
exactly.
you know, it's silly. They learn at whatever rate they learn at.
That's right. And I think it also has to do with that flexibility idea again. I mean, the teachers may give all of the children a journal assignment, but because they have had the children for more than a year, for the most part, so for the new ones coming in, but they really know the children, where they are intellectually, where they are, what they can do, what they're interested in. And so they can really gear what that child needs because they really know the child.
It's fabulous. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
It's fabulous because they do know these children and they do push these children. Mm-hmm. And they push them in a way that is very positive, but yet they have to keep boundaries. And I was always concerned when going into like a Montessori environment at what are the boundaries. And for my daughter, she's been given those, but she's been given those directly for her because those fit her needs. Mm-hmm. She might be working on one project where somebody else might be at a different level working on something totally different. Mm-hmm. And the kids are sometimes aware of this, but usually they're not. They just help encourage the other kids to do the best that they can do.
Anne Marie and Lorna, Jenny has a child who's probably pretty similar in some ways to your wonderful daughter. And she's going to go live. She's in Montessori. So, Jenny, I'm going to turn your mic on. And here we go. Hi, Jenny. Jenny, you there?
Hi, can you hear me? Yes, can you hear me?
Well, we thought we turned her mic on.
I'm not hearing her. Jenny, are you there?
I'm trying to talk. Can you hear me?
That's interesting. Not sure what's happening.
Okay.
I'm just going to make sure that our mic isn't turned off or something weird like that.
Okay.
You know? It's fine. I'm also going to make sure it's nothing weird with what the output is. So, Jenny, hang on just a second. And oops. We just lost PowerPoint, but that shouldn't be any big deal. Get that back open. Let me just figure out what's wrong with our speakers.
Do you know what else I was going to say that is something that I noticed? The reason that I originally picked this particular school, or Montessori in general, is, Lorna, you were taking me on a tour. And I noticed in one of the classrooms, there was a little boy, and he was washing windows.
Yes.
And this doesn't sound like a lot. And maybe a mother that hasn't experienced going through a tremendous amount with their child wouldn't appreciate this as much as I did. But I was watching this child and I was amazed because the inputs that he was receiving, the sensory, the activity, the fact that he was working so hard and there was water on him and it was on the floor and then he was cleaning it up. So he was following through on what he was attempting to do. The fact that he wasn't sitting at a desk and being instructed and being told, this is what you're going to do and this is how you're going to do it. The fact that he was able to be creative, but he must have known at that time that he needed to wash the windows because there was something that he wanted to fulfill within himself. And as a mother who has gone to countless hours of sensory and that type of thing, it was astronomically huge for me. And right then and there, I said, this fits my daughter.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Well, I'm not sure what happened with Jenny's sound, but here's what she was saying.
Yeah.
She asked you, Anne-Marie, is your daughter able to work with peers? And she goes on to say, the reason why she asks is that her child is gifted at a Montessori school, and her impression is that her son seems lonely because he works alone.
It's funny because depending on what, from my point of view, depending on what level of giftedness that they're at, they do have a hard time sometimes interacting with their peers. You have to find the right environment for them. And I do notice that she goes to certain peers for certain things that she's requiring. But she's learning how to do team building and she's learning how to interact that way. And the kids are learning how to interact with her as well. And that was one of the most crucial things that I needed to be able to have her learn at this age. The other thing that I thought was really amazing, particularly at this school, is the older kids also interact with the younger kids quite a bit. And the more that I get to know each of the older kids, I realize that sometimes they have a lot of the same similarities. They have things that they can, there's a lot of kids that are maybe in the same mental capacity that she's in, and they're older now, so now they can help her out in certain situations and get her to be included in that type of thing. Unfortunately, gifted kids, I think, sometimes get very isolated, and the best thing is trying to help them interact, and sometimes it's just transitioning them to interact with the other kids. And I'm blessed because I have teachers that are able to do that, and they know how to do that. Just getting them involved.
I think the team building component is really an excellent thing for any Montessori school. Most of us do some of that, but I think that there can be more, especially at the beginning of the year, to get everybody bonded and trusting.
Exactly.
And I think the other piece that you kind of emphasized without saying it is there's so much collaboration in a Montessori classroom among all of the children. It's not like in some schools where I don't want to be with them, they're the babies, or I don't want to be with them because they're this or that. It's more about we're all here and we're all learning.
Exactly.
And so let's see how we can learn together. I do think you're right, though, Anne-Marie. I think sometimes very gifted children do have that imbalance between the intellectual and the social emotional, and that may be why Jenny's son is having a little bit of difficulty interacting with peers. It may be that he's not exactly sure how to do it. And so that would be something that if I were you, Jenny, I would talk to the teacher if you haven't already, and just see what kinds of things the teacher might suggest, because they're very good at ideas for things that you could do at home on weekends, that kind of thing, and then also sharing with you what they're doing in the classroom to help with that particular situation.
There you go. So again, this wrapping up the slides, Montessori is looking at kids as individuals, and the teachers are trained to observe children as individuals and really come up with a plan for each child as an individual. The focus is not on a group lesson as much as doing whatever one can to help each child as an individual to go as far as he or she can. I often use the metaphor of a really good wellness center, a fitness center, where the personal trainers can work with someone who's really young and in great shape and preparing for athletic competition, to really push themselves, and they can work with someone who's middle age or older to do rehabilitation or restore their strength, lose weight. They individualize, and the whole focus is on what were you able to do last week? What are your goals for this week? Let's take a look at how you're doing.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Let's go to the next slide because we are not going to be done today, I can tell.
This is a great conversation.
It is. It's a wonderful conversation.
We're doing fine.
Yeah. Okay, so our next topic that we wanted to talk about, and maybe we've covered some of this in the conversation, but let's see, is to increase self-confidence. In Montessori, what we wanted to think about is now more how the student feels that has exceptionalities. And so we were looking at self-confidence and what are some of the ways that a Montessori environment supports and helps to develop that in children. So that first one, Anne-Marie.
Allow students to experiment, make mistakes, and learn from them. And the one thing that I've noticed, even with my daughter, is that a lot of times kids put pressure on themselves and they're their own perfectionists.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't like to make mistakes. And so I think for my daughter, it's been crucial that she does make mistakes and that she can then go back and learn from it and then retry it again at her own time pace.
Mm-hmm.
And my daughter is such a perfectionist that she might try something 15 times until it's absolutely perfect. And then she might show the teacher what she's able to do. So it's allowed her to realize that it's okay, that if you don't get it the first time, it's not such a big deal. You're going to be able to do it tomorrow if you decide that you would like to do it tomorrow.
That's right, absolutely. And I think many children that learn differently are either real observers, so they don't want to try things right away. They want to watch and watch and watch. And then there's this combination thing of that sort of perfectionist thing that goes on. So they're observing because they want to do it right.
Exactly.
And not make a mistake. And in some environments, making mistakes is frowned upon. I mean, it is looked upon as not a learning experience, but a failure.
As a failure.
And in our classrooms in Montessori, we know that the great people, the great inventors in the world, like Edison, they asked him how he figured out how to make a light bulb. And he said, well, I tried 1,000 things and 1,000 times it didn't work, but I just learned from each one of those times and tried something else. And so that's how I got it, and that's kind of where we are in Montessori.
And I also think if I would put my daughter into a regular classroom where there's 30 kids and she was called upon, and if she gave the wrong answer, that would demolish her. And there would be repercussions in my case because she would have felt that she had failed. And I would know that already ahead of time going in there. And with the Montessori, she's able to fail and she's able to do what she needs to do to be able to learn from those mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even look at it as a failure. I look at it as just something that she needs to learn to be able to get to the next level of what she needs to learn. Mm-hmm. And now she's starting to see that, that one thing will build on the next. And if I don't mess up with this sometimes, then I'm not going to be able to figure out the next part of the problem.
Sure. And I think that Montessori teachers are also very good at, or at least many Montessori teachers, and probably teachers in other fields, but there's a lot of them in Montessori that are very good at looking at what worked or what the child did right and saying, here's a page full of penmanship. And a lot of the letters are pretty awful, formed incorrectly, just not very good. But, oh, wait a minute, let's look at that O.
Yes.
There is an O on the, look at that O. That O is perfect. Let's make more of those perfect O's. So I think that there is that sense of let's see what you're doing well and let's build on that.
Let's build on that.
And let's
exactly.
not worry about all the other stuff right now, right at this moment in time.
As a quick aside, this is, of course, not only a way of working with kids, it's what we would call the Montessori approach to leadership of a school.
Mhm.
And it's very interesting to me. One of the chief of, I believe, human resources at Google just came out with a book called Work Rules. And in there, he talks about this very issue. He says, first off, if you want to understand the Google Corporation, you first have to understand Montessori. Without that, you can't comprehend what we're doing. And one of the good examples he gives is this idea of focusing on the positive among your employees rather than making them feel worthless, rejected, and in fear of their job, finding the right spot where they can be productive within the organization, and focusing on their strengths rather than picking at their weaknesses.
Absolutely.
Marriages work a lot better when you do
They
that.
sure do. Okay, let's go to the next one, which says accommodations. You know,
What do we mean by
well,
accommodation?
that's why there's the question mark there. It's like, what? Accommodations?
Hotels. We'll leave the light on
Yeah,
for you.
really. You know, a lot of parents who have children with exceptionalities or children who learn differently, one of the first things they'll ask a school is, well, what accommodations can you make for my child? And so, Anne-Marie, was that one of your first questions?
It was.
and
It
thoughts and so forth?
completely. I was very, very nervous because I had just gone through a tremendous amount with my daughter, trying to figure out where she was going to work well. And yes, so that was my first question. I came in with an IEP thinking, what are we going to do with this, and how do I effectively communicate what I think my daughter needs? And I go back to seeing the child washing the windows. And I was thinking, that works on my IEP because there's that sensory piece.
Yeah.
And they were allowing the child that if the child needed to take a break, the child was taking a break to do what they needed to do. So, yes, I was quite concerned about accommodations. Yes.
And when we think about accommodations as well for children with exceptionalities, we often think of, are you going to be able to give them extra time on a test? Can somebody read the test to them, the test questions to them? My child has a hearing loss. Can my child sit at the front, so they can hear the teacher better? Or, my child can't see as well as other children. Are you going to be able to enlarge the text for them? I think those are a lot of the kinds of things that parents think about, because they are on the IEP.
Yes.
And so how do we do that in Montessori? Do we make accommodations? Tim?
I mean, it's just sort of the basic nature of the way the program works.
Yes.
You're doing accommodations all the time.
Exactly.
And that really is the only reason why Montessori, without any specific training and certification in special ed, and I know the other side of the conversation is Montessori educators saying to each other, well, I don't even know what this disorder is, no less how to accommodate it. And, I don't think that Montessori can do all things for all children. I think we do the best we can. And it depends on the individual school and the class and how many children with exceptionalities. And, you might be able to handle 3, but you might not be able to handle 4. But the bottom line is when it works, and it usually works well, in fact, so well that there's a number of pediatricians in most communities that will refer every child with exceptionality to Montessori.
School.
Yeah. But I think when it works, it isn't because any of us are necessarily as knowledgeable as we should be about either giftedness, because not many of us are certified as gifted educators, or special ed. It is simply what you're saying, that we, by the nature of what we do, we are focused on kids as individuals and on accommodating.
So that was the first bullet. And the second one is, and we do that through observation so that we can recognize and meet a variety of needs. Observation informs our practice. That's what Montessori teachers are trained to do. So they're going to watch each child as an individual, and then what they see, what they've observed, helps them to know what it is they should be doing to meet those needs of those children.
We ought to talk about one piece. A lot of our friends, Lorna, you and I, are conventional educators, and they're wonderful people, and they're very, very brilliant, and their hearts are absolutely there. And they'll say to us again and again, my job is to cover a curriculum. I'm being held accountable by whether my kids can respond on the standardized test that's given during a specific series of days at the specific point in the year, whether they're going to answer those questions correctly. And if I screw up, I'm in real trouble.
Yeah.
So I don't have much time to know the kids as individuals. It doesn't mean that every conventional school teacher is doing that, because the great ones have always focused on kids as individuals, and they sacrifice, and they bring things in from home, they do all sorts of stuff. But in Montessori, it's just really easy to focus on the child more than your lesson.
Right.
Because the prepared environment really has much of the lessons are sitting there pre-planned, almost like a computer program is pre-planned. But of course, these are three-dimensional. That can lead to a whole different conversation.
Right.
Computers and Montessori. But I think that's why it works. Before you go on to your next bullet, I'd like to ask Anne Marie a question, because I'm the father of 3 kids with learning disabilities. Anne Marie, when you and your husband began to sense something was amiss,
Yes.
how did you feel?
I wholeheartedly decided that I was going to learn as much as I possibly could, and I was going to put every effort of my being into helping my daughter balance. My husband wasn't able to handle it quite as well. He had a very, very difficult time, and he still does on a day-to-day basis, trying to understand that his child is not the typical average everyday child. So where I tried to do my best to figure out how I was going to help her, he wasn't able to, he needed to learn himself before he's able to start making those steps. So for me, I started to devote everything I had to learning and reading and researching every possible thing that I could, because that helped me to be able to balance and feel like I was accomplishing what I needed to accomplish. My husband was the one who shut down more and who almost went through a depressive stage because he didn't understand that something was not exactly the way that he expected it to be. And then the marriage does suffer because you're on 2 different levels. And it seems like you either split apart and aren't able to handle it, or you have to really just keep going and know that one day that everything will be strengthened and that you have to be able to help better accommodate your child. And my daughter needs both of us. She needs both aspects of our personalities in order for her to be able to feel comfortable. I have gone to the teachers more times than I know and said, okay, explain this to me. How do I handle this particular situation? And because they spend so much time with my daughter, they actually know how to lead me in the direction. And I think it was the first year I was here, I dropped my daughter off and I would ask every single day, how was she? How was she? Is she doing okay? And the teacher finally looked at me and said, she's fabulous. Can you please go home and shower? And she wasn't saying it in a disrespectful way. She was basically telling me, it's time for you to take care of yourself. And it's time for you to strengthen yourself. So now your daughter is doing what she's supposed to be doing. Now it's time for you to start doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Sure. I think what you've described is very typical. I think that I would add to it that sometimes parents, when they either figure out on their own or when they're told by an expert that their child has a difference,
Yes.
They sometimes will go into denial.
Yes.
And they sometimes will go full forge ahead. Okay, let's see how we can help her, support her, take care of this, and fix it. Let's learn everything we can learn, do everything we can do. I think that's real typical. I think sometimes parents feel guilty.
Yes.
Because somehow they feel that it's their fault that their child has learning differences, or it's their fault that they're not quite what they expect them to be, what they thought when they were going through the pregnancy and going through thinking of this child that's coming into the world, and then that child isn't quite that. It's just hard sometimes.
It's very hard.
And they can just feel just horrible because they feel their child is suffering in some way.
Yes.
The other is they can feel horrible because all the other moms and dads are looking at them and thinking,
Or so-and-so.
Or this kid's a real pain in the neck, and why is he in my kid's class? Because he's eating up all the teacher's time and attention. He's just disrupting my child's learning.
Yes.
All of those things can happen.
And so I think all of the emotions that you've expressed about your family are very typical in many, many families. And I think that it's one of the things that if we could do a better job, it might be to really empathize more with parents so that we understand them better and can support them better as well. Do we have any other questions, Tim?
I don't see anyone else jumping in, so I do want to remind everyone, Jenny is one person who's asked questions. Good for you, Jenny. Ask more. And Rebecca and all the rest of you, you're welcome to jump in here at any point. And we can even try opening your mic up. So again, what I notice about accommodations is a few other points that children learn to ask for what they need. Boy, is that so typical in Montessori that the parent may still be the advocate, but it's the helping the kids to figure out what's going on and not feeling creepy about it and be able to say, look, this is what works for me, and being their own best advocate. That really helps.
Anne-Marie, you had a story about that just happened, I think it was last week. A young lady, not your daughter, when you were subbing in the classroom, was having trouble organizing herself.
Yes.
Can you share that a little bit?
This is through all of my learning with my daughter. I, of course, learned that I have learning differences, and I think if I had been in a Montessori situation when I was growing up, I would have done much, 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 much better. So watching some of the kids, I learned how I learn, and I was very aware, wow, this is what happened when I was in school, and I'm getting it finally now because I'm able to visually see the things that I need to see. And I'm very open with the kids, the fact that I have to have everything laid out in a particular way visually so I can be where I need to be, when I need to be there, with the things that I need to have. And I said, sometimes it's very stressful, especially in a situation where they give you, a whole list of different things like a work plan that they're hoping for you to accomplish for the week. And those are basically your goals. And I did say it's very, very difficult for a child that is not able to put things into balance. They don't know how to organize themselves because they've never been taught how to organize themselves. And to teach these kids, okay, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. If you need it color-coded, this is how we're going to do it. Do you need each subject color-coded? Do we need to put clocks down so you can see exactly what time you need to start this. And it's fun because I was sitting down with one child and saying, let's go over your goals and let's figure this out and talk to me about how you think that you learn and how you think that if I was to create something for you, it'd help you. And we went through a whole list of different things and I said, okay, we're going to work on this. I'm going to come up with ideas and then we're going to sit down together and we're going to try and prepare something. Then the second child came up to me and said, can we do it as well? Can we sit down? Can you tell me and show me maybe how to help organize myself? And it's funny because a lot of kids I would think in public school have those same needs, but they're not allowed to ask, and they're not allowed to take the time to actually ask can you help me do this? Because they're given parameters for so many things. And that was the one thing I thought was truly wonderful, because it allows then the kids to be able to say, I need to know how to do this, but I don't know how to do it. Maybe you can help me with this.
You. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think, again, we go back to that openness
Mm-hmm.
with you as a wonderful substitute, but with Montessori teachers will. And one of the things I think that you mentioned to me was you said, okay, well, we'll go ahead and see how we can organize this, and then we'll see what your teacher
Yes.
thinks and
Yes.
how she thinks it might work well for you. So that there is that whole sense of, okay, now we're figuring this out together. The teacher's going to take a look at it too, and we'll all work together
Yes.
to make it work for you.
And it has to be a team approach, because if everybody's not on board, it's the same with, if, for my case, I'm so fortunate because I have a teacher that communicates with me, and she's able, for instance, today we noticed that my daughter does very, very well in the morning, and then she starts to have a little bit of a harder time in the afternoon. Well, she has a hard time sitting and eating because she wants to get back to her work.
Mm.
So her blood sugar drops. Well, the teacher was very perceptive and realized right away that her blood sugar is dropping. She's not eating enough, and can communicate that with me. And let's observe this, and let's then sit down with your child, and let's come up with a plan that works for all of us. We're all happy.
Mm-hmm.
That's the type of thing that they're able to do.
And I imagine that's really hard to do if you're in a cafeteria with a couple hundred children sitting around eating
Screaming and yes.
Usually, to recognize
usually
that
there's an aide that's taking care of the kids at that point.
Okay, let's see. We are really running over today, folks. I'm sorry, but this is such a good conversation. We hope we're not tying you up from other things that you have planned for this afternoon. Let's go on to the next slide and see if we can do that. If you have to leave, remember that if you are a member of the Montessori Family Alliance, you can access the recording to this in about a week's time. If you haven't joined the Montessori Family Alliance yet, please do, because sometimes we do go over and it's all really great stuff. So hopefully you can stay with us this afternoon, or you can get that recording in about a week.
I do have to say there's a lot more to the Montessori Family Alliance, to the
true.
Recordings of these great webinars. So hopefully everyone will go to Montessori.org and take a look at all of the benefits of membership in the Family Alliance, and more people are joining every day.
Absolutely.
So experiential learning and accountability.
I think one of the big factors that really helps all children, but particularly children with learning differences, is the concrete learning materials that are always available from the time that they start, whether it's toddler or 3-year-old, all the way through in a very strong way, all the way through to the sixth grade. What would be the sixth grade? Certainly, if you have a middle school or high school that's Montessori, they don't use the materials as much because they're into abstraction. However, teachers often will give a sort of a demonstration using those materials again, bringing them back into that middle school class or that high school class, just to kind of remind them of what that concrete thing looks like and how that relates to geometry or science or whatever it happens to be. So those materials, because they're three-dimensional, because you can take them apart, you can touch them, you can look at them, you can, hear them, those are so important for children with learning differences. And I think that's a huge piece that helps.
I do too.
And then you said, Anne-Marie, you said practical life experiences are offered at every level. And that goes back to the little boy that was washing the windows again. Boy, he's coming up in our conversation a lot today. But
is he available to do
I don't know. He might be grown up by now. But at every level. And that's important too. It's not just the 3 to 6-year-olds or just the toddlers that are doing practical life like washing the windows. The children at the elementary level are running businesses. They are making up different types of activities and figuring out what the rules are and how do we work together on this, and that's practical life experience. They're learning how to, balance a checkbook. That's practical life. How to make invitations for a party. How to make an appointment for maybe their next tooth cleaning, I don't know.
Mhm.
All of those are practical life experiences. They change a little bit in their form as the children get older and can do other things. So that's a huge piece as well.
Yes.
For the children.
And it's funny, the other day, or actually it was a little while ago, but one of the teachers was taking a group of 4 kids outside, and they had wood boards and saws and everything like that. And I asked the teacher, I said, what are you guys going to be building? And she says, I don't know, we're just doing math, because these kids have to be able to see what they're doing, and they have to be able to apply the math to something that they're actually going to be building.
Yes.
Or something that they're going to use in life. And she says, please don't tell them that we're actually doing math and we're not just going out and building, because then, but that's what she was doing. She was taking what she needed to do and allowing them to do practical life skills so they could actually see what they were learning and why they were learning it.
Absolutely. So then we get into accountability.
Mhm.
And we're going to finish, I think this is our last slide. We're going to finish with this. In Montessori schools, learning is assessed in so many different ways. The teacher, just by simply observing how a child works with a lesson, if they see that they feel that it's mastered and that the child has a good handle on it, then they might say, hey, Tim, would you show that lesson to Anne-Marie? And then they watch and they listen and they see. Children quizzing each other on different things. We do it through their writing samples. We do it through their portfolios that they create of their work. We sometimes give them standardized tests because that's a practical life skill. It's not looked at as a make or break kind of thing as in many other schools, but they're going to run into those types of tests, and they need to know how to do them without getting anxious and crazy. So we do assessment in many, many ways, not just on your typical, all right, here's your spelling word, write it down. Okay, here's your math test for this week. Their math test might be to build something.
Exactly.
And so those are some of the ways. And what about grading?
What about it, Lorna?
What about grading? Most Montessori schools, I would say most Montessori schools do not use letter grades, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, whatever.
And most parents can't figure out why.
Yeah.
They if there's no grade, then it isn't real learning.
Well, many Montessori schools either do a rating type thing where they're beginning to learn. They've just had a lesson. They're beginning to repeat the lesson and work on it. They've mastered their lesson. Some schools use rubrics, though, too.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that.
Sure.
You're using an example, for example, from the software we helped develop, Montessori Compass, which is the typical Montessori strategy of saying, here's a specific skill, and we've introduced it to the child. The child's learning how to fly an airplane. We've introduced the child to it. There are different units or steps along the way. He can,
So he's practicing
he understands what the instruments are for. He can identify them. And you're looking at, does the child, actually know it? Does he know it well enough he can teach it to someone else? Can he apply it when chaos is happening around him? There's different levels of knowledge.
Right.
And so instead of a sort of a grade and say, English, I earned an A, we break English down into a whole set of skills. We don't assume that everyone's going to learn the exact same amount of skills in the same period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But rather we talk about what the child knows and can do at this point, where she is in the development of her skills and knowledge.
Yeah, but what if they're in elementary school, Tim, and they're doing a research problem? Let's just say they're at the end of elementary. They're a 6th-year student in elementary, and they've done a research paper project thing, and you're the teacher, and it doesn't really look like they put a lot of time and thought into it. What do you do about that? If we don't have an F?
I'd say nice try. That's not exactly what I had in mind. You need to go back and do that again.
Oh, so there's this thing in Montessori about why would we even accept a C, D, or F?
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't we expect every child to do their very best and to do work that would be what in another school they might call an A or a B?
Exactly.
I think the biggest issue, and this leads to another workshop that you ought to put on the
Okay.
agenda,
On the
is,
agenda.
how do you get a kid to do what you want when he doesn't choose to do it? I mean, lots of kids basically go through a weekend and they never even crack a book, they never do any of their homework. Do we care? I mean, is homework what we care about? If the kid knows it, my wife Joyce likes to talk about how all the way through school, she could walk in and take an exam having never attended a class or slept through class, and she'd know it all cold because that's just the kind of learner she was. Other kids can diligently work and work and work, and they'll freeze on exams.
Absolutely.
My daughter Chelsea with a PsyD always panicked at every exam, but yet she's on the faculty at Loyola and at Johns Hopkins, and she's doing all kinds of important work in clinical psychology, but this is a kid who hated exams, and there's lots of them out there. The whole issue is there's a paradigm we use in Montessori that a lot of parents and a lot of people in the public have a hard time understanding. And for the moment, we'll simply accept we do something different. Not everyone understands it, but it certainly contributes to why kids with exceptionalities tend to do well in Montessori, because it isn't black and white and everyone has to do the same thing at the same time, in the same way.
Absolutely. Next slide, Tim.
Wow, there's another slide.
It says, thanks to our Montessori parents for sharing their thoughts and experiences today. Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jenny, Rolling.
And
others.
Jenny and any of the others, thank you so much for helping us out with this today. We hope that you join us again next week. I'm not sure what our topic is. Do we have one for next week yet?
I certainly hope you do. But
Okay.
I'm not sure what it is.
All right, well, there will be one, and we will be here. So join us again next Tuesday at 1 o'clock for another exciting and wonderful topic.
This is all part of the Montessori Family Alliance Montessori Family Life weekly webinar series.
Whew, that was a mouthful.
It is. It really is. And if you are not already a member of the Montessori Family Alliance is like Prince, the artist who was once known as Prince or whatever he called. We used to be called Tomorrow's Child. Tomorrow's Child at 23 grew up and said, I want to do more, and this is all part of the more.
Yes.
And there is still Tomorrow's Child. So I think without any further ado, we'll call it a day. Thank you all for being with us. We so appreciate your time and your support. And thanks. Oh, I hear Jenny says siblings. We need to talk about siblings. That's a good one too.
All right.
And Karen says, what a great conversation. Keep it going. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you,
we
Karen.
will. All right. This is Tim Selden, Lorna McGrath, and this week Anne-Marie DeSillis saying have a great week. Goodbye.